that's what life is going to be like. This is all about geopolitics. It's all about President Trump's inclination to be, his desire to be able to tell other countries what to do.
Yes, and the question is whether he will get his way, because if you look, today a muted stock market reaction, but nonetheless down. As Michelle was telling us from Wall Street, it'll take time for real Americans to feel the impact of this. One wonders how long President Trump can ride it out if Americans feel that they're paying much more than they were before.
Well, and they're going to see the impact of this as well. They'll see it automobiles. That's one of the areas where the effect will be quite direct. If they put on high tariffs or quotas on Canadian lumber going to the United States, the cost for home building and for home repairs will go up. You'll see it in areas like food. You'll see it in a whole range of other areas. And the U.S. Manufacturing sector will become less competitive as U.S. importers, U.S. manufacturers have to pay more for the inputs that they need.
Yes, and I mean, we heard there from Prime Minister Mark Carney saying, look, we can give ourselves more than any foreign government can take away. He talks about self-sufficiency, Canadian workers using Canadian resources. How realistic is it that countries around the world can say, look, if we don't like what President Trump is offering, we can bypass the US, we can do our own thing? America is still the world's largest economy.
And we're not under any illusions. For my lifetime, the single most important relationship that Canada will have, either in terms of security or in terms of commerce, will be with the United States. But what we need to do in Canada is to ensure that never again do we allow ourselves become so dependent on the whims of any one individual or any one country. So we have to work systematically about how do we rebalance our relationships for security, for trade, for a whole range of other areas.
Really good to talk to you. Thank you for being with us on the programme. It is fascinating to see how this plays out and as you touch on there, how real Americans and indeed the rest of the world responds to this. Good to have you with us on the programme. Thank you. A reminder, there is a live page up and running right now as we get assessments of what those tariffs mean, how much it could cost not only firms that are selling to the United States, but also for the firms in the US that import those goods from all over the world. We know that the global supply chain is reliant on parts being shipped all over the world, and it means that some of those parts being brought to America will be more expensive. So there, bbc.com/news is where you will find the very latest on those new tariff announcements. Stay with us though. You're watching The World Today on BBC News. This is BBC News. These are the headlines. Donald Trump's Middle East envoy visits Gaza, saying his trip will help craft a plan to deliver food and medical aid. Stock markets around the world have fallen after President Trump announces sweeping new trade tariffs. London's Heathrow Airport unveils a £49 billion expansion plan. It includes a long-awaited third runway. And Licence to Thrill, the scriptwriter for the next James Bond film, is announced, and some might say he's played a blinder. We will explain that one for you a little later. But London's Heathrow Airport has unveiled a £49 billion expansion plan. Now, that includes a long-awaited third runway, approved by the British government after years of delays and opposition from local residents. Now, it's hoped the expanded site will be operational within a decade. Heathrow is already Europe's busiest airport. It serves more than 230 destinations across 90 countries, but it's already operating at close to maximum capacity. Now, officials hope the plans will pave the way for at least 30 new daily routes, including more domestic connections. Well, the British Chancellor, Finance Minister Rachel Reeves, said it was essential that the UK increased its airport capacity. But opponents of the plans have raised concerns about carbon emissions, noise pollution and other environmental damage. So here is more from Chancellor Rachel Reeves about why the government supports that third runway.
It is essential that we increase airport capacity in the UK. Two of the biggest exports from Heathrow are Scottish salmon and Scotch whisky. So this is good for the whole United Kingdom. Absolutely essential to ensure the things that we make here in Britain can be exported and sold throughout the world. And the applications that have come in will include investment in the infrastructure. For example, the changes around the M25 to make airport expansion necessary.
So that's what the government makes of it. The BBC's Simon Browning has been speaking to Heathrow Airport's chief executive about the plans announced today.
Well, that is a plan that would build a runway up to about 3,500 meters just northwest of where we're standing today. That would be able to accommodate another 50% of the capacity that we have today, both in terms of aircraft and passengers. It would add enormously to the economy of the UK. It would create thousands of jobs and add billions to the GDP of this country.
Environmental concerns are obviously huge at the moment. As I've said, 250,000 more flights coming in and out of the Heathrow site every year is going to put enormous environmental constraints on the environments and the communities around here. How do you plan to deal with that as time progresses and if you're successful with and move into a development consent order?
There is already a plan to get the aviation industry to net zero by 2050. That includes a third runway, so that is the plan we intend to follow. When we look at our current performance, we are ahead of our expectations on both noise, NOx, and carbon. So it can be done. Heathrow is the airport in the world with the highest uptake of sustainable aviation fuel. So we will follow those plans. And of course, there are legal limits, and government will make sure that there's no permission. We won't get our DCO unless we're living up to those standards.
Let's talk now to Murdo Morrison, who's head of strategic content at the aviation news site Flight Global. Murdo, good to have you here. And look, we looked at some of those numbers there. Heathrow is at exceeding capacity. It really is needed, but the question is whether it should be at Heathrow.
Well, the answer to that really is where else, because it's just really not practical to expand capacity or to provide the answer to Heathrow's capacity problems by building elsewhere. It's just a case of supply and demand. Heathrow is the UK's only hub airport. It's also by far the largest airport, and really it has to expand for the UK to remain a trading country post-Brexit, and for London to remain a sort of global capital. We need these connections to the world. Otherwise, investment will fall away, connectivity will fall away. This is really something that the economy needs.
Yeah, and this is something that's been talked about for decades now, isn't it? And nothing has yet happened. Are you confident that this will get the green light, that it will get built? Because we're talking here, it will still take a decade for it to be up and running, even if it all gets the green light and gets signed off today. It's still a good 10 years away, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert in large-scale construction projects, but or indeed in planning law, but I think it really, 10 years really is ambitious. When we look back and see how long Terminal 5 took, that was essentially a building, and all right, a very, very big building, but that took, nearly 20 years from start to finish. So I think even with the government speeding up the planning process, 10 years is still incredibly ambitious. But I think realistically, we could be looking at the end of the 2030s, possibly. Yeah. I mean, as you said, one of the big construction challenges, of course, is altering the route of the main motorway around London, the M25, and that potentially, according to one of those plans, would go in a tunnel. You touched on it, Murdo, about that competition with other European capitals. And, Heathrow lost that crown to Amsterdam, and they're all fighting it out. But it really is about, bringing that economic growth and airports and connectivity are what are able to get business up and running and get people where they need to go. But once again, it's that question of whether it needs to be in the southeast of England. Should we not be spending money on expanding places like Glasgow, Manchester, Birmingham? Yeah, I mean, I think all that is important, and it's important in terms of balancing out the UK economy and lifting up other regions. But as I said before, it really is just a case of supply and demand. The demand for slots, the demand for flights is into London, into Heathrow specifically, because that offers both London as a destination and the southeast as a destination, the biggest part of the UK economy, but also it offers that onward connectivity. So it's really the two parts of that which are Heathrow's business model. Yeah. And it's a roughly 50-50 split between people, what's called origin and destination traffic, people coming into or leaving from Heathrow as their start or finish, and people connecting through the airport. Perhaps not quite 50-50, but that connectivity, that connecting, that hub part of the model is very, very important for Heathrow. Yeah, Murdo, really briefly for us on the environmental issue, a lot of people will be concerned about the additional flights. On the other side, though, people saying, stacking up, flying around above the airport waiting to land because it's so congested simply adds to emissions anyway. Indeed, a more efficient airport will vastly improve the environmental side of things, and aircraft are getting cleaner. I think we're some way off that huge leap towards sort of hydrogen or electric powered aircraft, but aircraft are so much more efficient and cleaner and quieter than they were a few decades ago, and that progress will continue. Murdo, really good to talk to you. Thanks for being with us on the programme. Murdo Morrison there, Head of Strategic Content at Flight Global. Thank you. Elsewhere today, President Zelensky of Ukraine says the number of people killed in a Russian air attack on Kyiv on Wednesday night has now risen to 31. That includes 5 children. In a phone call with Sir Keir Starmer, he called for additional sanctions on Moscow. Meanwhile, in Russia, President Putin said Moscow's goals in Ukraine remained unchanged. The Russian leader was speaking at the meeting with the president of Belarus, that's Alexander Lukashenko. On Monday, Donald Trump said he had cut his 50-day deadline for Russia to agree a ceasefire or face new sanctions to 10 or 12 days. Steve Rosenberg has the latest.
On a remote Russian island, no castaway, just an away day for Vladimir Putin and his close ally, the leader of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko. Donald Trump says he's disappointed with the Kremlin leader for continuing the war in Ukraine. Disappointments, Mr. Putin said, stem from excessive expectations. No sign he'll accept America's 10-day deadline to make peace. His guest backed him up. 50 days, 60 days, 10 days, Mr. Lukashenko said. You don't do politics like that. It's laughable.
I think it's Russia, I think it's disgusting what they're doing.
President Trump isn't laughing as Russia continues to attack Ukrainian cities, leaving some in ruins. This is the shattered town of Chasiv Yar after 16 months of fighting. Despite ultimatums and deadlines, for now, the war goes on.
And so far, because Donald Trump has changed so many deadlines and he's twisted one way or another, I don't think really Putin takes him seriously, or ever did for that matter.
Experience shows that for Donald Trump, deadlines are not set in stone. They change, they move. But on paper at least, this one runs out in a week. And if by then Russia hasn't signed up to a ceasefire, it will face additional sanctions. And in theory, there'll be sanctions too against countries buying, for example, Russian oil. Earlier in Moscow, they gathered to remember Russians who were killed in World War I, the war which led to the Russian Revolution. But what do people here make of what's happening today and to President Trump's ultimatum? We experienced sanctions and ultimatums in Soviet times too, Andrei says. They existed before, and they'll happen again. It's nothing new. That doesn't mean, though, that Russia won't feel the pressure if President Trump chooses to exert it. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
Still to come on The World Today. Meet the radioactive rhinos. I'll speak to the scientists in South Africa injecting endangered animals with isotopes in a bid to prevent poaching. And the name's Knight, Stephen Knight, the creator of the hit series Peaky Blinders, is now confirmed as the writer of the next James Bond film, but still no word on who'll play 007. Around the world and across the UK, this is The World Today on BBC News. You're with The World Today on BBC News. Now, the Peaky Blinders creator, Stephen Knight, has been appointed to write the next James Bond film for Amazon MGM Studios. He says he can't wait to start on the project, which he says has always been on his bucket list. Lisa Mazimba has the details.
With 6 Bonds over 63 years, the series has had a variety of styles from a variety of writers. The announcement that Peaky Blinders creator Stephen Knight will be writing the next Bond film is exciting news for fans and for the writer himself.
It really is, and you know, it was always been on my bucket list, and it's fantastic to be invited to do it, and I can't wait to get started.
The franchise has had movies far more towards the lighter end of the scale, and then others which have been much darker in tone. Knight, who's known for his intense, gritty style, hasn't said what kind of approach he discussed with the Bond team, but his take on 007 seems to be what they were looking for.
You do some meetings, you discuss some ideas, and then you find out you've got it. So that was, I found out a while ago, but it was announced last night, which is great.
Bond is, of course, cinema royalty, so taking on such a high-profile role for such a highly anticipated film must be a high-pressure situation.
It is, but I mean, the way I look at it, you just got to do what you do it as well as you can, and then what else can you do? You know what I mean? So I'm hoping that, you know, being a Bond fan for so many years, that will sort of be imbued into me, and I will be able to produce something that's the same but different and better and stronger and bolder.
Fans hope the next big announcement will be the actor who'll take over from Daniel Craig as 007.
I know.
But that may not happen until the script is finished and the Bond team then decide which performer best fits their vision for cinema's most famous secret agent. Lisa Mazimba, BBC News.
Let's talk now to Harry Downing, James Bond superfan and film enthusiast. Harry, good to have you here. What do you expect? Well, I should ask first of all, are you a Peaky Blinders fan?
Absolutely, yes. I have watched the series from the beginning and thoroughly loved it. I've even gone to the experience in London where myself and my friends have dressed up as characters of the Peaky Blinders and interacted with actors that were portraying said characters. So I'm very immersed in that world.
Well, that's good because, you know, he's now got his hands on the Bond franchise. So two of your favourite things are now being written by the same guy. What will he bring to Bond, do you think?
Like was described in the VT, I believe that because the writing that he has done previously has been very gritty and down to earth and almost in a realistic nature, I'm hoping that he'll bring that to the Bond franchise, because that's what I felt came when we were introduced to Daniel Craig within the world of Bond from Casino Royale back in 2006. And I also thought about when Pierce Brosnan started and Timothy Dalton, they sort of brought this gritty edge to what is an iconic character that we know from the books. And so I'm hoping that Stephen Knight will also bring that too. And I think that would be almost a revolutionary, but also modernization again of the character that we can see in the new film.
Yeah, and that's always been the thing with Bond, isn't it? That ability to reinvent itself for a new generation. But yeah, you're right. I mean, this feels quite a pivotal moment because those producers that have been, you know, at the helm, Barbara Broccoli, Michael G. Wilson, they've stepped away. MGM Studios have got their hands on it with Amazon. So it feels like a moment where there could be a departure. But I guess there is a danger about it moving too far away from what fans love. And it's a bit, you know, the drama, the suspense, the tension, but also there's a bit of tongue-in-cheek stuff as well in a Bond film, isn't there?
Always, yeah. You could definitely sense that within like from previous iterations from back in the 60s, the 70s, 80s, even to today, where there is the tongue-in-cheek moments. But I think that at the end of the day, there's still some comedy or humour that comes with these films, and it's sort of stood the test of time in each iteration of Bond, and so hopefully that can still be brought to it. I mean, you can see within Peaky Blinders there is some humour in there as well, so, and his other writing, so hopefully that will come into these films as well. Like there'll still be a lot of things to look back on, or references to the past, or even amalgamations of what we've seen in these films brought into the modern world.
Who's your best guess for Bond? Who would you like to see as 007?
Genuinely, I can't put a name to a name. I think that it should be somebody that we're not 100% familiar with. It should be a very respected actor who, again, has gone through theatre, television, that we've liked on a small scale, that then can bring Bond into, or come into Bond and come into the big world of Hollywood and film and the British film industry in his own right, and make his own iteration of the Bond that we know, or hopefully can get to know through this actor. So I can't name a specific name, but I'm very excited to whoever it will be and whoever takes on the mantle from there.
Yeah, they've got big shoes to fill as well, haven't they? Harry, really good to talk to you. Thank you, Harry Downing there, James Bond superfan. Thanks.
Thank you.
Elsewhere today, rhino horns are being injected with radioactive isotopes. It sounds like something out of James Bond, doesn't it? But it's all part of a new anti-poaching campaign in South Africa. Scientists are hoping the move will allow customs officers to detect any smuggled horns as they're transported across the world, even if they're inside a big metal shipping container. Now, the researchers say embedding radioisotopes into the horns doesn't harm the animals, and hundreds of rhinos are killed by poachers every year in South Africa. So let's head to Johannesburg and speak to Professor James Larkin. He's Director of Radiation and Health Physics Unit at the University of Witwatersrand. They're leading the project to inject the horns of rhinos with those isotopes. Good to have you here. And just explain, first of all, how it works. I tried to run through it briefly there. I've probably oversimplified it, but the whole point of this is to try and prevent poaching, isn't it?
Good evening. Exactly, yes. It's to try and prevent. You haven't really oversimplified it. What we're trying to do is persuade people that, in fact, a rhino horn is not something that's a risk, and it actually belongs on the end of the head of the rhino. So, yeah, we're working hard, done a lot of research over the last couple of years, and here we are now.
The line isn't great, James, but I'm going to persevere because I really want to hear more about it. So let's give it a go. And explain a little bit about how it works, because we said the crucial thing is it doesn't hurt the rhinos, and ultimately will keep them safe. But how do you even come up with an idea like this? We did lose the line. We'll try and re-establish that line back with Johannesburg, because I think it's a fascinating story. You can see some of the pictures there and some of the statistics about the number of rhinos that are poached and then shipped all around the world, the horns particularly, of course. We'll try and re-establish that line if we can and go back there a little later. But from Johannesburg, let's take you to the world-famous Fringe, the renowned international festival, the wide range of Edinburgh festivals that start today. It means thousands of shows are scheduled throughout the month. With the very latest on what to expect, here's David Silliter.
Edinburgh is in full festival mode. 3,200 shows, but beyond the Fringe, the star attraction of the international festival is going back to the financial crisis of 2008. And one of the great dramas of that crisis in 2008 was taking place here in Edinburgh. 17 years on, it's now on stage.
But my point is, capitalism won. Capitalism?
Make It Happen, the story of Fred Goodwin and the drama of the catastrophe that hit the Royal Bank of Scotland.
The financial crash has a Scottish accent. This was the epicenter of that story. RBS at the time was the largest bank in the world by balance sheet.
And the star, Brian Cox, returning to the stage as the 18th century economist Adam Smith. Age, he says, has made him want to do work about the important things in life.
I can't believe it, but I've just entered my 80th year. I'm 79, so I'm going, well, it's now or never. You've got to start living up to something.
But Edinburgh is nothing if not varied. Hits can come from nowhere. For instance, this. Nearly 1,000 people watching a comedian fold a fitted bedsheet.
1,000 people came to see you
fold a fitted sheet?
Yeah, I'm as surprised as you are.
And while his show is about more than just sheets...
Dan, fold the sheets.
There's gloriously silly mix of comedy and laundry magic.
Third corner, you find that in there. Still inside out, you look for the tag.
Has become an Edinburgh thing. Quite why is a bit of a festival mystery. A bit like knowing how to fold a fitted sheet.
It's been a pleasure.
Witchcraft, total witchcraft. I don't believe it for a second.
We were telling you a little earlier about the really revolutionary way of maybe protecting rhinos by injecting radioactive material into their horns. We tried to establish the line, but we can't get there. There's more, though, on the BBC website. You can see it here. And the reason that they're doing this, of course, is to try and beat the poachers. They say at least one animal a day is still being poached. Since 2021, more than 400 rhinos poached in South Africa. So by injecting them, the hope is it will stop the flow of rhino horns. I'll be back with the headlines for you very shortly. This is The World Today on BBC News. It's 7 p.m. in London. This is The World Today. I'm Ben Thompson. Donald Trump's Middle East envoy visits Gaza, saying his trip will help craft a plan to deliver food and medical aid. A special BBC investigation looks into the huge number of young children shot dead or wounded in Gaza. In Leicestershire, a pensioner is charged with cruelty offences after children fall ill whilst on summer camp. And millions of drivers in Britain can't claim compensation for being missold car finance after a ruling from the Supreme Court. And stock markets around the world are down after the US president announced sweeping new trade tariffs. Hello, welcome to The World Today, an hour of international news from the BBC. The US Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff has visited a controversial aid distribution site in Gaza. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation site is run by an American company and backed by Israel. Mr. Witkoff was accompanied by US Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, and a team from the Israel Defense Forces. Steve Witkoff posted on X after the visit saying, "Today we spent over 5 hours inside Gaza, level setting the facts on the ground, assessing conditions and meeting with GHF and other agencies. The purpose of the visit," he said, was to give the president a clear understanding of the humanitarian situation and help craft a plan to deliver food and medical aid to the people of Gaza. Well, there are 4 GHF sites located inside Israeli military zones and operated by US private security contractors. This visit was to the site in the southern city of Rafah. Well, GHF aid sites replaced the UN distribution mechanism in May. It sparked international outrage. There have been near-daily reports of deadly shootings at GHF points, with the UN reporting at least 859 Palestinians killed in the vicinity of the sites. That's the figure that the GHF rejects. Well, the UN says around 1,400 Palestinians have now been killed seeking food since late May. Israel says its troops have only fired warning shots and that they do not intentionally shoot civilians. Well, Mr. Witkoff's visit coincides with the largest airdrop of aid so far into the territory, with Germany, Spain, Belgium, France and Bahrain taking part alongside the United Arab Emirates and Jordan. Well, UN agencies have said there is a man-made mass starvation in Gaza and has blamed Israel, that controls the entry of all supplies to Gaza. Israel has insisted there is no starvation in the territory. Well, like other international news organisations, the BBC is forbidden by the Israeli government from reporting from inside Gaza. So our correspondent John Donison sent us this report from Jerusalem.
This surely isn't the best way to get aid into Gaza. On the ground, a desperate scramble with nowhere near enough to go round. Hunger has driven people to turn on one another like this, says Amir Zakot. If the crossings were open for just one day, food could reach us. But this is nonsense. Donald Trump's man in the Middle East was in Gaza this morning to see for himself what the president has called real starvation. Steve Witkoff visited the much criticised GHF aid distribution sites, but it's not clear how many Palestinians he spoke to. For them, the desperate daily struggle to find food goes on.
I send a message to US officials and to Witkoff. End these things completely. Stop the war entirely. We don't want aid here. We come and get humiliated and shot at. We are humiliated just for a loaf of bread.
Amid the chaos to get their hands on aid, the UN says over 1,300 Gazans have been killed in the last 2 months. People have been bringing back bodies, not just supplies. The majority allegedly shot by the Israeli military at the US-run GHF sites. Israel says it will investigate. For Gaza's hungry children, a trickle of help is now coming from the heavens, with aid being airdropped in. Kids haven't been to school for almost 2 years. And 10-year-old Dima and her friends have this message for the Americans.
Trump needs to stop the war and bring more aid. Anything. because we want to return to our homes, see our friends, and eat whatever we want.
Limited aid is now getting in, but the UN says it's nowhere near enough. And in Gaza, what little hope there is comes and goes. John Donnison, BBC News, Jerusalem.
Well, the BBC World Service has compiled material on over 160 cases where children have been shot in Gaza and found that in 95 of them, the child was shot in the head or chest. In most of these cases, the victim was under the age of 12. Now, the cases we found run from the first weeks of the war up until July of this year. As we said, Israel does not allow foreign journalists to enter Gaza, and destruction and displacement make it difficult to gather material. Well, the BBC's World Service population correspondent Stephanie Hegarty reports, and a warning: this report contains distressing images of children with injuries, many of them fatal.
A man and a small child are lying on a street in Gaza City. In his final moments, the man reaches out to touch the child. This video was broadcast in December 2023, but there were no details of who these people were. For months, we tried to find out more about them, trawling social media and reaching out to contacts on the ground, until we found a name for the man, Mohammed Al-Majdalawi, and his daughter, 2-year-old Layan. Layan's is just one of 95 reports we've compiled of children who were allegedly shot in the head or the chest in this war in Gaza. To compile this list, we verified media reports, spoke to human rights researchers on the ground, and to 30 doctors and nurses who treated these children. More than 2/3 were under 12 years old. In 57 of these cases, it was alleged that the IDF shot the child. In 2 accounts, the children were allegedly shot by Palestinians. For the remaining 36 cases, we have no account of what happened. But what led to Layan's death? This is Layan's sister Shahid. She was 12 and with her mother, father, brother and sister that day. She told us they were fleeing bombing and walking down a quiet street when they came to this junction, and she saw a tank up the street to her left.
شفنا الدبابة احنا صرنا نجري في الشارع احنا سبقنا بابا نطلع احنا لقيناه مرمى على الأرض فكرناه وقع إشي.
She said they ran back to help and realised their father had been shot.
أنا مديت إيد عليها بدي أمسكها لأن دغري أجت رصاصة في إيدي دغري صار الرصاص لي وصار أبويا يصرخ روحوا صوبوني روحوا صوبوني.
They fled and never saw Mohammed or Layan again. We found a satellite image taken 2 hours before the shooting. We don't have permission to broadcast it, so we've recreated it here. In it, we can see a tank along the same street where Shahid says she saw one 2 hours later. Military expert Stuart Ray examined the image and pointed out many other tanks, armoured vehicles and defensive sandbanks, and these tall buildings, indicating this was an IDF fortified position. We presented our findings to the IDF, and they said IDF soldiers operate against terrorist organisations in complex urban environments, and unintended or erroneous harm may occur in the course of combat. They said the details of Layan's case have been recorded and will be examined by the competent authorities. Kay fought with the IDF in Gaza in early 2024. He described several incidents in which his unit killed unarmed people, including 2 boys he described as young teenagers.
Anyone you see off the humanitarian road, shoot. Shoot to kill. That's what we were told. Our commander qualified that. Of course, if it's a woman or a child, don't shoot. Try to detain them. Don't be stupid.
Do you think there's a lack of accountability?
I would definitely say there's a lack of accountability. When we lost some people in a firefight, it was just it. Destroy everything. Kill everyone you see.
We put this soldier's allegations to the IDF, and they said the IDF remains committed to minimising harm to civilians as much as possible. Yanina Dill is a professor of international law at Oxford University and reviewed our findings.
It's often very hard to come to a definitive, even a preliminary legal conclusion from far away, where you never have all the evidence. And in this instance, the available evidence points so directly towards a very serious violation of law, potentially even a war crime. That's quite rare.
Layan and Mohammed's remains lay on Hamid Street for days, as their family fled from the chaos of this brutal war. And until we contacted the family over a year later, They had no idea that this video even existed.
And there's much more on that story. There's a full report. It's 14.5 minutes. It's worth watching on the BBC website, bbc.co.uk/news. Now, a little earlier, I spoke to Sir Geoffrey Nice, who's a leading human rights lawyer and a former prosecutor at the International Criminal Tribunal. He gave me his reaction to that investigation.
Well, there are 2 points that emerge from the full film, one of which has a commander addressing his men in terms that are plainly unlawful, because he basically says, shoot everyone you can in unless very particular circumstances. Now, that's unlawful, and I'm sure a military expert would tell you that. If you've got one part of a defense, of a military force, the Israel Defense Force in this case, showing signs of infection of that part of the force by an unlawful code of conduct, course of conduct, and indeed it may be a code of conduct for them, then you're entitled to ask the question, if this force can be so infected by illegality and criminality, then may not other parts of the force be similarly vulnerable? It's always worth bearing in mind when people ask questions about chain of command, it's worth bearing in mind that it's very rarely going to be worthwhile the mid-level soldier or commander breaking the rules of the force for which he works, because if he does, then he's going to be in real risk of discipline from above him.
Sir Geoffrey Nice speaking to me a little earlier. Elsewhere today, US President Donald Trump says he has ordered 2 nuclear submarines to be positioned in regions near Russia in response to threats from former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev. On Thursday, Mr. Medvedev told Mr. Trump to remember that Moscow possessed Soviet-era nuclear strike capabilities. That was after Mr. Trump told Mr. Medvedev to watch his words. Our Chief North America correspondent Gary O'Donoghue is at the White House.
For the last few days, there's been a war of words between President Trump and the former Russian President Medvedev, who's been still involved in the administration in Moscow, particularly over President Trump's threat to tariff and to tax Russian imports into third countries such as India and China. President Medvedev, the former president, saying that there was a game of ultimatums that the president was playing, reminding Donald Trump that Russia still possessed Soviet-era nuclear weapons. Well, the president now saying that this language, as he puts it, is inflammatory and foolish, and now announcing the movement of these 2 nuclear submarines. So some really serious connection between the economic war and the real wars potentially here, and a serious escalation, I think, in between the 2 countries.
Gary O'Donoghue there in Washington. Meanwhile, President Zelensky of Ukraine says the number of people killed in a Russian air attack on Kyiv on Wednesday night has now risen to 31. The number includes 5 children. In a phone call with Sir Keir Starmer, he called for additional sanctions on Moscow. Well, it comes as President Putin says Moscow's goals in Ukraine remain unchanged. The Russian leader was speaking at the meeting with the president of Belarus, that's Alexander Lukashenko. On Monday, Donald Trump said he'd cut his 50-day deadline for Russia to agree a ceasefire or face new sanctions to 10 or 12 days. With the details, here's Steve Rosenberg.
On a remote Russian island, no castaway, just an away day for Vladimir Putin and his close ally, the leader of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko. Donald Trump says he's disappointed with the Kremlin leader for continuing the war in Ukraine. Disappointments, Mr. Putin said, stem from excessive expectations. No sign he'll accept America's 10-day deadline to make peace. His guest backed him up. 50 days, 60 days, 10 days, Mr. Lukashenko said. You don't do politics like that. It's laughable.
I think it's Russia, I think it's disgusting what they do.
President Trump isn't laughing as Russia continues to attack Ukrainian cities, leaving some in ruins. This is the shattered town of Chasiv Yar after 16 months of fighting. Despite ultimatums and deadlines, for now, the war goes on.
And so far, because Donald Trump has changed so many deadlines and he's twisted one way or another, I don't think really Putin takes him seriously, or ever did for that matter.
Experience shows that for Donald Trump, deadlines are not set in stone. They change, they move. But on paper at least, this one runs out in a week. And if by then Russia hasn't signed up to a ceasefire, it will face additional sanctions. And in theory, there'll be sanctions too against countries buying, for example, Russian oil. Earlier in Moscow, they gathered to remember Russians who were killed in World War I, the war which led to the Russian Revolution. But what do people here make of what's happening today and to President Trump's ultimatum? We experienced sanctions and ultimatums in Soviet times too, Andrei says. They existed before, and they'll happen again. It's nothing new. That doesn't mean, though, that Russia won't feel the pressure if President Trump chooses to exert it. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
Around the world and across the UK, this is The World Today on BBC News. You're with The World Today from BBC News. Now, millions of drivers who could have been in line for one of the biggest mass compensation schemes ever seen in the UK have had their hopes dashed after a landmark ruling by the UK's Supreme Court. All this relates to alleged mis-selling of loans to motorists. But judges did rule that one of the three motorists at the centre of the case did have a case. It means that thousands more could still get payouts. Mark Ashton has the details.
Britain's roads are teeming with around 30 million motorists, with 9 million new and used vehicles being bought every year. Most purchases arranged via a dealer involve some kind of borrowing from a finance company. The courts have been assessing whether the deals on offer are fair.
But once I saw that, I thought that's got to be the one, you know.
In 2017, Marcus Johnson bought a new car in South Wales. Unknown to him, the dealership was paid 25% commission, which his lawyers argued in court wasn't fair. And today, the highest court in the land agreed.
We fought it hard for over 3 years, and it's finally come full circle. And I couldn't be happier. It's a massive win.
But the Supreme Court threw out two other test cases, rejecting the idea that dealers had a duty to get the best finance deal for customers, even if they lost out themselves.
They were motivated throughout by their interest in selling cars at a profit. It follows that they did not owe any fiduciary duty to the customers.
About 90% of vehicle purchases are made using some kind of finance arrangement. If the big lenders had lost today, they were facing billions of pounds in compensation payouts, possibly crippling the industry. As it stands though, despite this ruling, millions of motorists might still be in line for some compensation. The Financial Conduct Authority had already banned sales where dealers had the discretion to set the interest rates motorists paid, often at higher rates than they'd agreed with the lenders, in order to gain more commission. Details of a wide-scale redress scheme are now expected within 6 weeks. But some, like Gemma from Blackburn, might still be willing to go to court in search of a higher payout.
I feel like I've been massively taken advantage of. I think because I opened up and I told them about my situation, I think they took that and took advantage of that for them to be able to get the best out of that deal rather than me getting the best out of that deal. I feel foolish.
Today's judgment, though, has limited the scope and scale of payouts.
Some of the numbers before this court case came out and this ruling were up to £44 billion that car finance firms would need to pay. And some were even saying it could knock onto other areas of consumer lending, so the figure could have been even bigger. The Supreme Court has scaled that back. You're probably, and it's still, I guess, it's very early days, you're probably talking still around the 10 to £15 billion figure.
For now, the advice is to do nothing. Anyone who has been treated unfairly should be contacted and compensated.
The very latest there. Let's talk now to Andrew Wrench, who's been campaigning for compensation after he discovered that car finance lenders have been paying commission without his knowledge to the dealerships where he bought 2 cars. Andrew, good to have you here. Just start us at the beginning. When did you first think you might have a claim?
Well, basically, it was July 2023. I'd started the situation with a small solicitors firm. And I noticed that within the contracts that of the 3 I'd actually purchased through the motor finance, that hidden within the contract was this with the commission. And I then approached the solicitors in question, and then they took the case upon them. And they started proceeding from there. And they believed in me from day one. March, it actually started, July 2023, right till this recent point. And having awarded the Court of Appeal last year, felt it was in good stead to proceed. However, that was appealed, and hence the decision being made today with the Supreme Court. And I'm very pleased for the record for the Johnson family. But I'll await and see when I speak to the head of CRS, when he contacts me, where we proceed from here.
Yes, we should just be clear there is still some scope for some compensation for a more specific type of contract where, people were incentivised basically to boost the interest rate that people were paying on loans. But to come back to your case,
yes.
Essentially what happens now, and this ruling suggests that the court thought, actually probably what we all think is that a car dealership isn't on your side, it's on its side. It's there to make money. It's a commercial business, and therefore if it can get you to pay more, then it will earn more money as a result. Should customers be going into these things a bit more informed, a bit more aware of what they're getting into?
Well, I think this has highlighted it for sure. Anybody going into a contract, I've purchased cars cash for over 30 years. However, these 3 recent purchases all through the same motor finance company. And at that point, I realised I had a budget in mind. I went in with the approach of purchasing them cash and then presented with the finance itself. But I just believe in honesty, the discretion of showing me that I then have other options, which it wasn't disclosed on all 3 contracts that I'd taken, stemming over 9 years. I had the budget in mind, what I could afford monthly, but then not being shown where the hidden commissions were and so on, disclosing that's where I felt a little bit let down. But I do hope then there are compensatory packages put towards the consumers. Yes.
Yeah, and briefly, if you will, for us, how disappointing is it that you've now got essentially to the end of the road for your specific case?
I'm not disappointed. I think it's highlighted for the right reasons. I think a lot of people have been on this journey with me, my immediate family and the legal professions. And like I say, my barrister and the legal team have 100% been behind me. Yeah. So it's highlighted it for the right reasons.
Andrew, good to talk to you. Thanks for explaining your case. Let's talk now to Adrian Daly, who's Director of Motor Finance and Strategy at the Finance and Leasing Association. That basically represents car lenders. Adrian, good to have you here. You must be thrilled with the verdict today.
We are very pleased with the outcome from the Supreme Court today. This is an industry that millions of people across the country rely on to buy a car, to get to work, to go to school, to access society. So it's very good that we can now forge ahead with confidence that we can continue to provide that service to millions of people.
But does Andrew there have a point that actually, dealerships should have more clarity? They should be more transparent about what they are offering and why they are offering it, because obviously the Supreme Court was just looking at the legalities of this, and we know that dealerships are there to make money. They're only going to sell a car if that customer has finance in place to buy the new one. Should they be more transparent?
Well, a car deal only takes place if it works for the person selling the car, the person buying the car, which is the finance company, and the consumer. All 3 are willing agents and can choose to proceed. But you're right, it's central to that all 3 parties, especially the customer, get the information they need. In particular, what's the nature of the agreement, how much they're paying per month, how long is it for, is it the right product that they need, can they afford it? All that is the information they need, and that's what customers get. The existence and nature of a commission has never been a secret. It's always been there. It's always been there to be disclosed.
Yeah,
and the court has confirmed that today.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. And of course, not entirely vindicated in this. There is still that outstanding issue about whether some agents were bumping up the interest rate that you pay and then were incentivized to do so. That could still mean the industry pays that cash. Have they put a number on what that could run to?
We think it's likely to be a very low number if the regulator, the FCA, eventually decides to proceed with a redress scheme. But to be clear, what we're talking about there is what is known as DCAs, or discretionary commission arrangements, which disappeared many years ago. But this is about historical practice.
Yeah.
The 3 cases before the court today were in the middle of the last decade. So the FCA is looking at whether and to what extent there may have been losses in the past. And if so, how to proceed. But it's important to remember here that consumers do not need to do anything at this stage.
Yes, that is a really clear point.
This scheme, it'll be a clear scheme. Wait to hear what the regulator says.
We will. Adrian, good to talk to you. Thank you. Adrian Daly there. You're with The World Today. This is BBC News. These are the headlines. Donald Trump's Middle East envoy visits Gaza, saying his trip will help craft a plan to deliver food and medical aid. A pensioner in Leicestershire is charged with cruelty offences after children fell ill while on their summer camp. Millions of drivers in Britain won't be able to claim compensation for being mis-sold car finance after a landmark Supreme Court ruling. And stock markets around the world are down after US President Donald Trump announces sweeping new trade tariffs. And that is where we begin this half hour, because stock markets around the world have fallen after President Trump announced new higher tariffs for dozens of countries that failed to reach a trade deal ahead of a deadline this morning. Well, in New York, all three major indexes were down on opening. That's the current situation live on the Dow Jones on the New York Stock Exchange, down 1.2%. That follows similar falls in Europe and Asia during the day. Well, the tariffs, essentially, remember, those are taxes imposed on any goods that arrive in the US from overseas. They are due to come into effect in 7 days, with the exception of some Canadian goods that will start immediately. Brazil initially thought it got off lightly with a 10% tariff. That's now been raised to 50%. Elsewhere, India has been hit with a tariff of 25%. But what impact will the president's plan to shake up the global economy actually have on its key trading partners? And of course, on the American economy itself? Well, for more, I spoke to our South America correspondent, Ione Wells. But first, let's hear from our North America business correspondent, Michelle Fleury.
You have to remember that it is the US importer of the foreign product that pays the tariff. Now, obviously, they can try and get the foreign exporter who's selling goods to America to try and maybe pick up some of the price. They can absorb it themselves. But eventually, the expectation is that they will pass it on to the consumer. We are beginning to see that. Companies like Procter & Gamble saying that a range of goods will go up in price as a result of tariffs. You've also got companies like Ford saying that they've had to pay a lot of money to import cars, to import parts, and also because of tariffs on products like steel and aluminium, key components of the vehicles they're making. So we're starting to see the impact on companies. We're still waiting to see ultimately how it will impact consumers. And in terms of the Federal Reserve, which sets interest rates, they're trying to see how it will feed through to prices. But on the jobs front, we're already beginning to see signs of cracks emerging in the labour market. We got a weak report this morning which suggests that that uncertainty that we've been talking about for months and months now, Ben, is really beginning to kind of affect hiring decisions.
Yes, and we'll start to get a sense of what it means for the US economy itself. But Ione, let me bring you in here, because look, Brazil initially thinking it had got off pretty lightly with that 10% tariff. That's also what the UK has. But now that's been ramped up to 50%. And some suggesting this is just proof that this isn't about economics. It's not about trade. This is about politics, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the reason that Brazil initially got a 10% tariff was because it doesn't have a trade deficit. The US, in fact, sells a lot more to Brazil than it buys from Brazil. The reason for this 50% tariff on lots of Brazilian goods, although some are exempt, is politics. Donald Trump has attributed the 50% tariff to the trial of his ally, the former right-wing president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, who is soon to face trial over allegations he plotted a coup after losing the last election. These allegations include a plot to kill the current president, Lula da Silva. Now, Mr. Bolsonaro denies all these charges, but Donald Trump has really taken this cause to heart. He has described it as a witch hunt.
So that the very latest on those countries affected. Let's talk now to Andrew Gibbs-Dabney. He's the founder of Livzen. It's an outdoor clothing wear company that imports clothing from Vietnam. Andrew, good to have you on the programme. And give me a sense here about what this means for you. You are, I assume, quite reliant on importing things from all over the world, but particularly there, Vietnam. What does it mean for how much you're paying for that stuff?
Well, look, we're still waiting for the chips to fall here to adjust retail pricing. A lot of the trade deal with Vietnam's not even in writing yet. And inevitably, we'll have to change our retail pricing to account for increased costs. We just don't know exactly how much yet.
And how able are you to do that, do you think? Because obviously if you raise prices too much, your customers say, I'm simply not going to buy it. I mean, what flexibility do you have? How much will they be able to absorb, do you think?
Well, time will tell. In addition to running those pricing scenarios so that we can respond rather than react, we're preparing for a rough patch ahead. The way we're doing that is we're cutting operating expenses where we can. We're cutting product lines where we can, so that we have the ability to weather that storm and absorb those increased costs. We'll see that as soon as December when we bring in our next batch of inventory.
Yes, and I mean, there are a few things at play here. So let's discount some of the politics that might be involved in Mr. Trump's plan. One of his stated aims, though, as well, is to bring jobs back to the United States, to encourage maybe firms like yours to buy things domestically, buy it in the US rather than importing it from Vietnam. Is that even feasible for you right now?
Well, look, I don't know if you know this, but our company is a certified B Corp. And one thing that means is that we are obligated and feel strongly that we take into account everybody across our value chain, all of our stakeholders. That includes the factories and the factory workers we work with in Vietnam. So we chose these factories and these suppliers because they build the best quality product for what we build. So right now we're working hand in hand with them to minimize the harm here. But the ultimate risk, or one of the risks, is that changing suppliers, changing supply chains brings with it potential to decrease quality, decrease consistency, and potentially not even, we can potentially increase or decrease pricing. But the act of having to change our supply chain in the first place is a concern.
Yes, of course. And I suppose that's my question, in so much as, we know that this takes time for factories to start, being built and then manufacturing this stuff in the US to then potentially maybe be able to supply you down the line. That takes many years. All the while, you've got to work out what you're doing with the business. And I suppose, are you having those discussions right now, saying, actually, is there a way that we can avoid these higher tariffs by sourcing some of this in the US?
Yeah, I mean, we have to do what's right for our business. So we're obviously looking around and assessing the possibility of doing that. I would say that we have a great relationship with our factory. They build an amazing product. They're great people. They pay above a living wage. They've gone through our supplier code of conduct in past. And so the reasons why we're moving are not because of any moral reasons or ethical ones. It'd be purely business. And ultimately, we're committed to making a high quality product. And our mission is to make that product with function and utility in excess of impact on the world. So we'll go where that is. It's just not as easy right now as going to the United States.
And how long do you think you can sit out this uncertainty?
Not much longer. Like I said, to be able to weather what we're projecting an increase in cost this fall, we're having to make cuts to spending and product lines now. Depending on what happens, we'll have to increase sales to make up for increased expenses, potentially raise prices. I mean, I believe our business is on strong footing and our mission will continue no matter what the tariff landscape is or who's in office. But yeah, this is a threat that we're having to actively manage, not business as usual.
Andrew, good to talk to you. Best of luck with it. I know it's a difficult time for a lot of businesses right now, but thanks for talking to us on the programme. Thank you.
Problem. Thank you.
Now, elsewhere today, London's Heathrow Airport has unveiled a £49 billion expansion plan. Now, it includes a long-awaited third runway that's already been approved by the British government after years of delays and opposition from local residents. Now, it's hoped the expanded site will be operational within a decade. Heathrow is already Europe's busiest. It serves more than 230 destinations in nearly 90 countries, but it's already operating at close to maximum capacity. Well, officials hope the plans will pave the way for at least 30 new daily routes, including more domestic connections. Well, British Chancellor Rachel Reeves said it was essential that the UK increases airport capacity. But opponents to the plans have raised concerns about carbon emissions, noise pollution and other environmental damage. Here's more from the Chancellor Rachel Reeves about why the government is backing the third runway.
It is essential that we increase airport capacity in the UK. Two of the biggest exports from Heathrow are Scottish salmon and Scotch whisky. So this is good for the whole United Kingdom. Absolutely essential to ensure the things that we make here in Britain can be exported and sold throughout the world. And the applications that have come in will include investment in the infrastructure. For example, the changes around the M25 to make airport expansion necessary.
Well, that's the government's view. The BBC's Simon Browning has been speaking with Heathrow Airport's chief executive about these latest expansion plans.
Well, that is a plan that would build a runway up to about 3,500 meters, just northwest of where we're standing today. That would be able to accommodate another 50% of the capacity that we have today, both in terms of aircraft and passengers. It would add enormously to the economy of the UK. It would create thousands of jobs and add billions to the GDP of this country.
Environmental concerns are obviously huge at the moment. As I've said, 250,000 more flights coming in and out of the Heathrow site every year is going to put enormous environmental constraints on the environments and the communities around here. How do you plan to deal with that as time progresses, and if you're successful with and move into a development consent order?
There is already a plan to get the aviation industry to net zero by 2050. That includes a third runway, so that is the plan we intend to follow. When we look at our current performance, we are ahead of our expectations on both noise, NOx, and carbon. So it can be done. Heathrow is the airport in the world with the highest uptake of sustainable aviation fuel. So we will follow those plans. And of course, there are legal limits, and government will make sure that there's no permission. We won't get our DCO unless we're living up to those standards.
Well, Murdo Morrison is head of strategic content at the aviation news site Flight Global. I asked him if Heathrow was the right place for more air traffic, or whether other parts of the country should get expansion first.
Yeah, I mean, I think all that is important, and it's important in terms of balancing out the UK economy and lifting up other regions. But as I said before, it really is just a case of supply and demand. The demand for slots, the demand for flights is into London, into Heathrow specifically, because that offers both London as a destination and the Southeast as a destination, the biggest part of the UK economy, but also it offers that onward connectivity. So it's really the two parts of that which are Heathrow's business model.
Yeah.
And it's a roughly 50-50 split between people, what's called origin and destination traffic, people coming into or leaving from Heathrow as their start or finish, and people connecting through the airport. Perhaps not quite 50-50, but that connectivity, that connecting, that hub part of the model is very, very important for Heathrow.
Murdo Morrison speaking to me there. Police in Leicestershire have charged a 76-year-old man in connection with a suspected poisoning at a children's summer camp. Our correspondent Navtej Johal has more now from the village of Strahan.
Yes, this evening Leicestershire Police have announced that they have arrested a 76-year-old man. His name is John Reuben. He's from Ruddington in Nottingham, and he's been charged with 3 counts of willful ill-treatment of a child. They say that the charges relate to 3 different children at this summer camp here in Stathen Lodge near Melton Mowbray in Leicestershire. Now, to recap, on Sunday the police received an initial report of children feeling unwell at the camp. Now, this is a location which is used for summer holiday camps for children, has been used in that way for many, many years. Now, police didn't arrive in the area until the following day, on Monday, and we understand that they arrested a 76-year-old man at a nearby pub. Then 8 children and an adult who had been triaged at a nearby village hall were then taken to hospital as a precaution and have since been discharged. The police say that due to the circumstances of their initial response, they have referred themselves to the Independent Office for Police Conduct, and the IOPC has said that it is investigating whether there were any breaches of professional behaviour. Now, police have also said in their statement that the owners and operators of Stathen Lodge are independent from those people who use or hire the lodge and are not connected to this incident. The 76-year-old man, John Reuben, is due to appear at Leicester Magistrates Court tomorrow.
Navtej Johal there with the latest. Police in Scotland have launched an investigation after an 8-year-old boy was sexually assaulted at a campsite in the Highlands. The attack happened in the boy's tent in the village near Loch Ness shortly after midnight yesterday. The father of the boy, who saw the suspect leave, then raised the alarm. Police are searching for a white, bald man between the ages of 30 and 50. Around the world and across the UK, you're watching The World Today on BBC News.